Spectrometer, or AMS, needed repairs, NASA's Johnson Space Center and Goddard Space Flight Center used their joint expertise to make it happen. At Goddard, that expertise resides in NASA's Exploration and In-Space Services Division, or NEXUS, which evolved from the office that was responsible for the Hubble Space Telescope servicing missions. Key to these missions was the development of specialized tools. While you've probably heard of Hubble, you may not be as familiar with AMS, so let's start there. Designed for a 3-year mission of sifting through cosmic ray particles, AMS has been looking for signs of dark matter from its position on station since 2011. Hundreds of researchers have used the data collected to investigate the source of the mysterious substance to help us better understand the origins of the universe. To continue this important data collection, AMS needed an upgrade due to general wear and tear from the harsh environment of space, specifically a new cooling system. A repair could extend its life beyond what was originally planned. Sounds easy enough, right? In fact, due to the instrument's complexity and the fact that it was not designed to be repaired, even gaining access to the system to replace it was difficult. AMS's design did not incorporate the kinds of interfaces that make spacewalks easier, or have the ability to be serviced with traditional multi-purpose tools. And so, over the course of 4 years, NASA got to work designing and developing some of the most complex spacewalks since the Hubble servicing missions in the 90s and early 2000s to fix AMS.
The AMS tools themselves were unique. They were built specifically for this task, a task that was never intended to be performed on a spacewalk. And so that required a lot of thinking about how we were going to get inside so that we could access the tubes that we needed to cut into and then install the new thermal control system, but also how to put handling aids on it so that we had a place to attach our tethers, to attach our foot restraints, to have handholds, have a place to attach equipment that we needed out there.
NASA developed 20 specialized tools to make the job possible, and on November 15, 2019, astronauts Andrew Morgan and Luca Parmitano got to work. On this first spacewalk, astronauts needed to get access. By design, 5 of the tools could be seen floating off into space, attached to the debris shield that was removed to give the astronauts access to the heart of AMS.
The debris shield handling aid was one of the first tools that Luca installed on the EVA, and this gave us a handhold to install on the debris shield to work from, but also a handle for me to hold on to ultimately when we jettisoned it overboard to the aft side of the ISS, which was a lot of fun to do.
The astronauts continued with 3 more spacewalks over the next 2 months, using all of the specially designed tools. One such tool was the Tube Cutting Guide, which was a direct result of multiple practice sessions at Johnson Space Center facilities like the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. While practicing, astronauts communicated the need for a way to identify and verify the correct tubes to cut, since they all look the same to the astronauts' eyes within the spacesuit.
After we had removed the debris shield and the VSB cover, now we have the tubes exposed, and we actually had to cut into those tubes in order to pull out the correct ones to connect with the new thermal control system, the new pump. In order to do that, we had to be very sure of the tubes that we were cutting. These ingenious tube cutting guides installed over the top of the tubes and made sure that we knew and we were communicating correctly with the ground team to make sure that we were cutting the correct tube at the right time.
In January 2020, Luca Parmitano and Drew Morgan completed the 4th and final spacewalk to repair AMS. Because of their work and the ingenuity of tool designers and engineers, the instrument is now back in commission and able to continue to collect data about the origins of our universe for years to come.
People from Goddard and JC spent a lot of time developing these tools with their knowledge and the support of astronauts like Chris Cassidy. And we are very thankful that we were privileged to use those tools and to put them to very successful use. Thank you very much.
Afternoon and welcome to NASA's Kennedy Space Center. I'm NASA Press Secretary Jackie McGinnis, and this morning NASA waved off the Artemis 1 launch attempt after teams encountered a liquid hydrogen leak while filling propellant into the core stage of the SLS rocket. Unfortunately, the team wasn't able to troubleshoot the issue today, but to tell us more about the next steps NASA will take following the mission management team meeting this afternoon, we have with us NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, Associate Administrator of the Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate, Jim Free, and Artemis Mission Manager, Mike Serafin. First, I'll hand it over to Senator Nelson for opening remarks.
Well, while we don't have the launch that we wanted today, I can tell you that these teams know exactly what they're doing, and I'm very proud of them. You think back to previous space flights. The shuttle was sent back to the vehicle assembly building 20 times. I already shared with you my personal experience back in the early part of the Space Shuttle program of Hoot Gibson's crew having been strapped in, ready to go, and scrubbed 4 times with a delay of over the better part of the month. we do not launch until we think it's right. And these teams have labored over that, and that is the conclusion that they came to. So I look at this as a part of our space program, of which safety is the top of the list. They will tell you, starting with Jim, they'll tell you the specific reasons why they decided to stand down and what they think that the future holds. Just remember, we're not going to launch until it's right. And that is standard operating procedure and will continue to be.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. So absolutely, I hope you know we're not where we want to be, except with the vehicle safe. So we wanted it safe in orbit. It's not there. It's safe on the ground. I'm going to kind of give you the big picture of where we're headed with the launch periods. And then I'll let Mike fill you in on some of the things that happened today. Charlie Blackwell-Thompson is back in the Launch Control Center with her team, working through some of the next steps that the mission management team asked her to do today. So launch period 25 is definitely off the table. We won't be launching, this period ends on Tuesday. We will not be launching in this launch period. Launch period 26 and 27 will really depend on the options that the team comes back with, likely on Monday or early Tuesday morning, and Mike will talk through those options with you. One thing I'll point out is we will deconflict with Crew 5, so there is an overlap with our next launch period and the time frame when Crew 5 wants to go. We need to make sure we deconflict with them, so that will weigh into what we do. And then as we get into launch period 27 in the latter part of October, we will be looking at a lot of things, our limited life items, our stay on the pad durations that we have, and of course we're always looking at weather as a general course of action for some of the storm activity that can be out there. I'm sure there's going to be a question of, are we confident? Right, I actually love that question because it's like, are you confident you were going to get out of bed this morning? We don't go into these tests lightly, right? We don't just say, hey, we hope this is going to work. The confidence to do another launch attempt today was born out of the fact that we understood the hydrogen leaks that we had on Monday. Those are different than the leak that we had today. In terms of scale, one was in the same place, but today was a different signature. And we understood the engine issue. So we were confident coming into today. But as the administrator said, we're not going to launch till we're ready, which means we're going to step through these things. There's a lot of conjecture already. I can assure you, I don't know how many people are in that MMT room today, Mike, but I don't know, 100 plus folks, most of them engineers, everybody already thinking about what is the problem. And frankly, that's what happens on the loops when we're talking about these things. Folks are giving options. The anomaly loops are really active, especially on this one today, from the time we first saw the signature all the way until Charlie made the right decision, which was to scrub. So our confidence comes through what we're going to learn in this. When we're ready to go back out there, we'll go back out there and try for another launch. Mike will lay out for you what we have in between. I'll say this, obviously, we've talked about this mission being risky, but we're going to take the risks that make sense. The risks that we know that have already pushed the vehicle and the system as far as it will when we launch, and be ready to go at that time. So with that, let me turn it over to Mike for some more specifics.
Okay, and good afternoon again. Thank you for continuing to follow the Artemis 1 mission in our program. I'll just briefly recap where we left off the last time we were here, which was after the Launch -2 mission management team meeting on the 1st to review our readiness to head into this launch attempt. If you recall, the launch operations team out of the Launch Control Center stayed in the launch countdown. following the attempt on Monday, and that gave us a head start headed into today's attempt. The team, when we came in for the tanking meeting, which was to decide whether or not to load the vehicle with the cryogenic fuel and oxidizer today, was on the timeline or slightly ahead, and it was a clean meeting. We met at 04:45 this morning, and we talked about our setup for the day, and there were a few items that we talked about, but most of those were of no particular constraint relative to setting up for our launch attempt. The team identified that they had 46 collision avoidance cutouts in the launch window. Most were a minute, most were just a few seconds. The longest ones were about a minute. We do have, at this particular time of year, a high propellant bulk temperature, which gives us more performance out of the rocket. So essentially, we have a hot rocket in terms of the performance to launch, and that actually, as we fly up through the Earth's atmosphere, pushes the higher end of the maximum dynamic pressure, or Q bar. And we saw that we had positive margins, but lower margins on one specific area on the Orion spacecraft, and we were watching that. The vehicle was expected to get to about 700 pounds per square foot of pressure as it headed up through the period of maximum dynamic pressure. Just prior to the cryogenic loading operation, the team was working through a chill down, and there was an inadvertent pressurization of the hydrogen transfer line, that the pressure exceeded what we had planned, which was about 20 pounds per square inch. It got up to about 60 pounds per square inch. And the flight hardware itself, we know, is fine. We did not exceed the maximum design pressure, but there's a chance that the soft goods, or the seal in the quick disconnect at the 8-inch quick disconnect, saw some effects from that. But it's too early to tell exactly whether that was the cause of the hydrogen leak that we had today. What we do know is that we saw a large leak at the 8-inch quick disconnect today, and that leak started when we went from the slow fill to the fast fill. This particular quick disconnect did not have a problem of this magnitude on Monday. We did see a small leak, but we did not see one of this magnitude. It was characterized as a large leak by our operations team. The team tried 3 times to resolve the leak, and all 3 times we saw a large leak. And as was discussed previously, if you can thermally stabilize both sides of that quick disconnect, we have a ground side and a flight side, and that is where the fluid flow occurs through. If you can chill that down and ensure that there's no differential temperature across that interface, sometimes the leaks can seal themselves or heal themselves. So the team attempted that. They attempted to essentially reseat the leak by increasing the pressure in there, and that was not successful. So initially, the team declared the scrub at 11:17 Eastern time, and then went into vehicle safing and drained the cryo. The liquid oxygen is currently off the vehicle, and the liquid hydrogen, at least when we were in the mission management team meeting, was still on board the vehicle, and they were in the process of draining it. It should be off by now, or very close to it. The team will get into what they call the inerting, which is they put gaseous nitrogen in there so as not to condense water vapor in the tank area, and then they'll swap over to air. What that does is it allows us to get the tanks back up to ambient conditions, and then for us to gain access. In the scrub meeting that we had at 2:30 Eastern, we talked about 3 options. The first option was to simply demate and remate the umbilical at the pad, hoping that the soft goods would seal the leak up. But our confidence level, given the size of the leak that we saw today, was fairly low, that would solve the problem. The team leaned towards a removal and replacement of the soft goods in the quick disconnect, and the options were basically to do it at the pad or do it back in the vehicle assembly building. And either of those options do not preserve our ability to fly before the end of this launch period, which expires on the 6th. So the team is developing a series of schedule options, and we're going to hear about those early next week. The schedule options include removal and replacement of the soft goods on the quick disconnect at the pad, followed by a cryo test. That is the only place we can get a full cryo test to ensure that we do not have a further issue with respect to leaks at the temperatures that we need to fill the vehicle on day of launch. The other option is to roll back and remove and replace the quick disconnect soft goods in the vehicle assembly building. There's a risk versus risk trade. Doing it at the pad, you're exposed to the environmental conditions, and we need to build an environmental enclosure to do that. If we do it in the vehicle assembly building, the vehicle assembly building is the environmental enclosure. However, we cannot test this quick disconnect in the VAB at cryogenic temperatures. We can only do it at ambient temperatures. So we're working through those options. The team, it's too early to say, but they're working through a fault tree analysis as to why we did not see a leak of this magnitude on Monday, but we're seeing it of this magnitude at today's attempt. And they're also looking at the chill down procedure to look at additional controls such that we don't have a reoccurrence of the inadvertent overpressure that we had earlier today. So all that said, we've talked about it before. This is an incredibly hard business. This is an initial test flight of this vehicle. As was said by Administrator Nelson, we're going to fly when we're ready. And as part of this initial test flight, we're learning the vehicle. We're learning how to operate the vehicle, and we are learning all of the things required to get us ready to fly. And we've demonstrated a large number of those things, not only through wet dress and some of the other ground tests that we've had, but we are still learning as we go, again, to get this vehicle off safely. So our focus is on understanding the problem, developing solutions in terms of schedule, but also risk versus risk impacts, and we'll follow up next week when we have those options fleshed out further. So with that, I'll pass it back to Jackie.
Thanks, Mike. So now we'll open it up for questions in the room and also on the phones. On the phones, as a reminder, press *1 to get into the queue. And in the room, if you could leave your hand high for the mic folks to come get you after you ask your question. First up, Joey Roulette with Reuters.
Question for Mike. If you decide to roll back, and I know it's uncertain right now, what's the quickest you could roll SLS back out to the pad? What would that look like, and what other things would you have to do in the VAB while it's there?
We're looking at several weeks to do that, depending on the required work at the pad or whether we do it in the vehicle assembly building. That'll determine the exact schedule, but it's several weeks of work. It's really too early to say exactly how many days.
Thanks. And up next on the phones, we have Marcia Dunn with the AP.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes. I was wondering, so are you saying if you do the repairs at the pad and it seems to go well, you could still maybe get off in September by the end of the month before the SpaceX launch coming up at the beginning of October? Is that a possibility? And the way things stand right now, which way do you think you're leaning for? Thanks.
I'll just take the first part of that. I think we still have our constraint on the range, with the range to test our flight termination system, which is right now we have 25 days. I think we're going to talk with the range about what the possibilities are. But in order to test our batteries, change out the batteries, we have to roll back for that. And I'll let you handle the options.
Yeah, and Marcia, with respect to whether or not September, the latter part of September is still in the trade space, I think it's too early to tell. It really comes down to what does the fault tree analysis tell us, and what are the necessary changes and mitigations required in order to have a confidence that we've resolved this large leak at the 8-inch quick disconnect. So I think we'll have a much better answer early next week, and right now it's just too early to tell.
Thank you. Next, we have Tom Costello with NBC.
Hi, good afternoon. Can I just clarify, you said that the line had been overpressurized up to 60 psi. Do you believe that that overpressurization potentially caused the leak that then you were dealing with all day today? And any idea how that line was overpressurized?
Yeah, I guess what I'd say is I think Mike talked about the fault tree. We have to go look at, is that a cause? Is that the cause? I'm sure it'll end up on the fault tree, but we have to run through all legs of that fault tree before we decide that's absolutely the cause. We do, I think, I forget how the words that you used last one. We kind of tune in this hydrogen. We did that on Monday. Monday we saw it start to go up, and we slowed the rate and did a manual fill. That's just part of the process, and we need to look, as Mike said, to automate that and get the places where it'll cut out if the pressure is going too high, so we don't hit that kind of command again. That'll be part of what we automate and practice for the next time. But it's on the fault tree. It's kind of tough to say right now. Yeah, that is the absolute cause.
Chris Davenport with Washington Post. Oh.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, you're going back to the VAB no matter what, right? I just want to clarify that. And I wonder if you could just briefly, Mike, talk about the differences with this hydrogen leak, this big one that you had versus the one that you were able to overcome on Monday. Thanks.
Yeah, for the VAB part of it, it's what I said. We have to go back right now. We do not have an agreement with the range that we can launch when our batteries have not been tested after 25 days. So that runs out here, as Mike said. And so in order to change them out, we have to go back. To get that kind of extension with the range is something we'd have to talk to them about. So right now our position is we will have to go back to the VAB. When we go back will depend on the testing options that Mike talked about.
Yeah, and to take a crack at the second part of your question there, Chris, in terms of the leak that we saw on Monday, it was a manageable leak. This was not a manageable leak. As soon as we started to get into fast fill, and we need to get into fast fill, again, as part of this delicate balance of you want to you want to load within the capability of the quick disconnect, which tells you want to slow it down, but you also want to speed it up so you can make your launch window. So you've got this balance between the flow rate and the pressure, and if there's a leak present, you need to manage that. So on Monday, the team was able to successfully work their way through that while staying below the hazardous concentration limit of the hydrogen that was leaking out. We were unable to do that today. It was a much larger leak. The team tried to work and use the same technique as part of a pre-planned procedure. They tried multiple times, and that didn't work. In addition to trying to bump the quick disconnect and try to reseat it, and none of those techniques worked. The techniques that we used on Monday, just for this magnitude of leak, were not working in our favor.
Thanks, Mike. Kristen Fisher with CNN.
Thank you. Just wondering if there is a precedent for getting an extension with the range on something like this. Has that ever been done before? Or if you all were to ask the range for that to allow the vehicle to stay on the launch pad before next attempt, would that be something that hasn't been done before?
I think we worked with them just recently to go from 20 to 25 days, showing them a lot of the technical data that they needed to see about the integrity of our system. So I'm confident there's probably been other ones. I can't quote the history, but I can tell you that we just negotiated with them to go from 20 to 25.
So do you feel at least somewhat confident that there's a chance that perhaps this rocket could stay on the pad before a next launch attempt?
But that's I mean, my conjecture is I don't know because it's really their call. And I think we have data that probably supports it, and I know our folks are going to go talk to the range as soon as they're able to. But that's really, that's serious business that they deal with and we deal with, and we want to respect that this is their range and we're launching from it.
Lauren Grush with Bloomberg.
Hi, Lauren Grush with Bloomberg. I'm wondering if you can walk us through exactly what hardware you need to be replacing, exactly where it is, and how time-intensive that work will be. Thanks.
Yeah, Lauren, so I'll take a crack at that. Right now, we're focused on the 8-inch quick disconnect and simply the soft goods, the seal that surrounds it. We need to get through the fault tree analysis to figure out exactly if there's anything else that needs to be accounted for. It's a little too early to tell again as to what else may be in play, what other work may be necessary. So there's the kind of your engineering review board or technical analysis that'll happen in the office environment, and then we'll go out and we'll demate the umbilical, whether it's at the pad or in the vehicle assembly building, depending on what the team brings forward next week, and we'll put those two together and decide what are the things that we can resolve based on the data that we already have from the fault tree analysis, and say we don't need to check these things or we absolutely need to check these things, and then we will also have some witness information when we demate the umbilical. We're being very thoughtful about demating the umbilical at this point because we also don't want to disturb what may be critical engineering data as part of that. So before we proceed into a simple, what we think may be a simple removal and replacement of this quick disconnect seal, we want to make sure that we're not overlooking something. So we're going to take some time to go through this from an engineering standpoint, go through any potential cause or exclude any potential cause based on the information we had. So it's a little too early to tell exactly where we may need to do some work.
Thank you. Eric Berger with Ars Technica.
Two quick ones about the hydrogen. First of all, maybe Mike, if I was standing there with a bucket and some cryogenic proof gloves, like how quickly would it fill the bucket? Just want to sort of get a sense of the magnitude of the leak. You've called it a large leak. And then for Senator Nelson, when you were writing the authorization bill in 2010, sort of setting up this space launch system, did you have concerns about the continued use of hydrogen due to its leaky nature and your experience with it on shuttle? Thanks.
Well, I'll answer that right out. And along with Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson, along with our folks in the White House, deferred to the people who best knew the systems. And so the answer to your question is no. We did not have any question about hydrogen. We deferred to the experts.
Yeah, and Eric, to answer your question about how large is the leak, I wouldn't use a bucket analogy on that one. It really is a concentration. When you have a fuel source in atmospheric air that contains roughly 20% oxygen, when you mix the two, all you need is an ignition source to close the fire triangle. So we know that when you get above roughly a 4% concentration of hydrogen in ambient air, you're at risk of having a flammability event or a flammability hazard. We were seeing in excess of that by probably 2 or 3 orders of magnitude today. So I'm sorry, not orders of magnitude, 2 or 3 times our acceptable concentration limit. So it was pretty clear that we weren't going to be able to work our way through it like we did on Monday in terms of the managing of the leak. Every time we saw the leak, it was a large leak that immediately exceeded our flammability limits. So, again, a couple of techniques were tried, and we just couldn't get there today.
Tariq with Space.com.
Thank you. Yes, Tarek Malik with Space.com from Mike. Just to follow up on Lauren's question about the nature of what has to be replaced. You mentioned soft goods. Is that as simple as just a rubber seal? Is it silicone? Or is it more hardware that you do have to replace? And why would you need an enclosure around it? Is it just to prevent corrosion then on that seal? Thank you.
Yeah. So the quick disconnect, it's a metal poppet-like device, and it has a gasket around it. And I don't know the exact gasket material, but if we were to see damage on the quick disconnect, that would tell us we would need to replace the hardware. If we saw foreign object debris, that would tell us that maybe we got something else going on. Or if we just saw a simple damage on the gasket, we've got spares. We can quickly remove and replace that. Our history of our own testing at the Launch Equipment Test Facility, which is right here resident at the Kennedy Space Center, tells us that a leak of this magnitude is typically resolved through a removal and replacement of the soft goods, that seal, and that's kind of one of our leading suspects right now. But again, we need to go through the fault tree. We need to inspect the hardware. We need to see what the hardware is telling us. So in terms of exactly what needs to be done, it's too early to tell. And I'm sorry, there was a second part to your question. I don't recall what the second part was.
About the enclosure.
The enclosure, yeah. So the enclosure affords us the ability to provide what we call a purge at that interface. And the purge allows us to push nitrogen in there to essentially inert or push out any oxygen in there. So it reduces the likelihood of a flammability hazard. So if we were to just pump regular old air in there, regular old air has oxygen in it. And we eliminate that oxygen by creating an enclosure and putting nitrogen in there to displace any oxygen, such that if there is a hydrogen leak, you've got one leg of the fire triangle removed.
Thanks. Now we'll go to a question from the phones. We have Ramin Skiba from Wired.
Hi, thank you. This is a question, I think, for Mike. I was wondering, what are the risks to the CubeSat secondary missions if there's a significant delay? Like, is that a factor in determining the launch date? If some of them cannot be recharged, if their batteries cannot be recharged?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ramin. We do maintain a open communication loop with the CubeSat customers, so we will certainly inform them that we did not have our launch attempt today, and what our next launch attempt looks like from a schedule standpoint, and we'll make a risk-based decision based on a whole host of factors. If we do need to roll back to the vehicle assembly building, we could top off the batteries for a number of those, or they may not even need to be topped off based on what we believe to be the known battery decay rate and battery state of charge. I personally haven't seen all that data, but it is part of the process of looking at a given launch period. And we will share that information with our CubeSat providers and then decide what the appropriate next steps are. Whether or not any of those are at risk at this point, I don't have the data in front of me to answer that question.
Thanks, Mike. Micah Maidenberg with Wall Street Journal. Put your hand.
Hi, Mike. I wanted to follow up on the inadvertent pressurization that you mentioned. Micah Maidenberg, Wall Street Journal. Just back to the inadvertent pressurization, that was 3 times the amount of pressure that was planned for. Could you walk us through sort of what led up to that, and have you seen that before in practice runs or at the testing facility? Thanks.
So we're still reviewing the data and the sequence of events, but as I understand it, it occurred during the chill down prior to the loading operation associated with loading the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, and it was part of the preparatory steps. And there was a sequence of about a dozen commands that were required, and it was simply the wrong valve was commanded, and it was identified after about 3 or 4 seconds, and then it was rectified. So that's what we understand. We know what the pressure profile looked like at this particular interface, and we're looking at again the sequence, and as was mentioned by our lead project engineer earlier today, we want to be deliberate and careful about drawing conclusions here, because correlation does not equal causation. So we are taking a look at the inadvertent overpress, and we're looking at what that meant to this particular interface, and then we're looking at the fault tree associated with the leak that we saw, and if there is a conjunction of potential causes on the fault tree, then that'll take us down one path. If there is no root cause that you can trace to that, then that'll take us down a different path. So again, it's a little early to tell. We've looked through quite a bit of information already, but we got to work our way through this one, and we're going to do it methodically.
Jeff Faust with Space News.
Jeff Faust of Space News. If the Eastern Range allows you to extend the life of the FTS and you're able to do the repairs on the pad, are there any other factors that would allow you to stay there and not have to roll back?
I think what I said earlier is we have to look at our stay at the pad, because there's some, for Orion at the crew and service module, there's some constraints at how much time they can spend at the pad versus the winds. So we have to look at that, and if we're within that would be something we'd look at as a plus side if we can stay within that analysis. But I think ultimately we're driven by the FTS. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Mike.
Yeah, we need to look at what work exactly we need to do, and there may be, depending on the fault tree analysis and any inspection work that we do, it may mean that the vehicle assembly building is the right place to go do this work. We are mindful that we're out there in the elements when we're at the pad. That has a couple of pros and cons associated with it. The cons happen pretty much every afternoon around here when you get a shower or thunderstorm rolling through, and we don't want to have issues with that interface because we demated it out there in the environment. So we're going to talk through all those things. I think it's, again, a little bit early to say as to what the right path forward is. Flight termination system is certainly one variable that we've got to consider as part of all this. And as Jim said earlier, the range has and the Space Force have been fantastic partners working with us as part of our government and interagency work. We don't own that decision. The range owns that decision. So we would have to work with them and talk to them before any decisions are made.
Marina Corin with The Atlantic.
Thank you. Hi, Marina Corin with The Atlantic. Are you at all considering doing another wet dress rehearsal after you've implemented some repairs instead of going right into another launch attempt? The administrator said earlier, we're not going to launch until it's right. So in order to get to that point, is there anything that would make you say, okay, let's go back, we're going to test until it's right? Thank you.
Yeah, I guess what I'd say is, whatever the connection that we're testing under ambient is going to acts a lot different than cryogens. We've tested this one in our wet dress rehearsal 4, this sealed at 4. We saw it manageable the other day. So to us, hydrogen's difficult to work with. I think Mike characterized that a couple of press conferences ago. So from our perspective, we may look at in these options when we stay at the pad, if we change it at the pad, do we do that cryogenic test there? And what that cryogenic test consists of is TBD. That's what the team will come up with. But from my perspective, we tested this at a wet dress. So to say, hey, we should have done another wet dress, this one sealed at the wet dress. I will take everybody back. I think the summer of 1990 was the summer of hydrogen, where shuttle had been launching for 9 years, and they spent a whole summer chasing hydrogen leaks. So I'm not saying that's an excuse. That's just a fact. And we've seen a couple different hydrogen leaks. I think we're trying to dial this vehicle in. Whatever this fault was, we have to find out, and we will run it to ground and build that confidence that I talked about earlier to come out there again. If the team says, hey, a wet dress is the way to go, then we need to figure that out. But right now, from my perspective, we've tested this. It's worked a couple times, and it didn't today. We'll figure out the reason why.
And the only thing I would add is we know we don't need to do a full wet dress rehearsal if we were to test out this interface. For example, we don't need to load the interim cryo propulsion stage or the upper stage. We know that those interfaces are fine. So if we were to do a cryo test at this particular interface after some work is done at the pad, we don't need to do a full up wet dress rehearsal, if that makes sense.
Next up, we have another question on the phones. David Curley with Discovery.
Serafin, you talked about it being inadvertent. Was that software that caused the overpressurization? And is that something you've not seen other times when you were doing the pre-chill? And I take it from your earlier answer, soft goods that you're considering that the overpressurization may have affected are gaskets, O-rings, anything that's pliable. Thank you.
Yeah, so the first part of that question, the inadvertent command and overpress, again, it's a little bit early to tell exactly what happened. We're still working our way through it, but what we do know with this was a manual sequence, and it may have been the fact that we didn't automate this particular sequence that could have been part of the reason that we had the inadvertent overpressure. There are a whole host of other reasons that when you're an operator and you're working through a command sequence that could have also come into play. So we're just going to have to take time to look through it. We're going to look through the data, and we will go back and reassess exactly why this inadvertent command happened. In terms of soft goods, yes, it's basically a seal that is a non-metallic material. I don't remember what the particular material is, but yes, that's what we mean, or what I mean when I say soft goods.
Thanks, Mike. Irene Klotz with Aviation Week.
Thanks. I think this is probably for Mike. There was some time between the recommendation to scrub and when Charlie decided to call it a day. Was there additional troubleshooting that was being discussed as an option? Is there anything else that was gleaned from the activities that took place today? And then separately, is the sensor issue that we were here talking about a couple of days ago, is that a factor at all in any of these scenarios? Thanks.
I'll start with your last question. The short answer is no. The sensor issue that we saw the other day, that is on the engine side as part of the engine bleed that's used to thermally condition the engines.
Replacing it or doing something to address it during this time?
No, that really hasn't entered into the discussion. In terms of additional troubleshooting, there was a pause before a scrub was declared just to ensure that we had exhausted all of our options. And we had some discussions come from our engineering team as to what a potential option may be, and it turned out to not be a viable option. So there were some ongoing discussions to ensure that we had really exhausted all of our options, and that's why there was a little bit of a pause towards the end before the scrub was declared.
Here in the second row.
Hi, my name is Jacob Sidesi. I'm a student tech reporter at WUFT News out of the University of Florida. I have two questions. One, so I know I heard earlier that the temperature affects how the rocket launch goes in some ways. So as summer goes into fall, goes into winter, how is this mission going to need to be adapted going forward this far into the future? And second of all, I know it's one you're not going to want to hear right now, but I want to ask it anyway. How does this pushback affect the timeline of the Artemis program as a whole?
I'll take the second one. We are still planning Artemis 2 in 2024 and Artemis 3 in 25.
Okay, and then in terms of temperature effects, because we have a combination of solid propellant in the boosters and liquid propellant in the core stage, the core stage really has no significant impact due to temperature other than what we call the boil off, which is you cause the propellant to go from a liquid to a gas, and you're not able to feed the engines as part of that. There's essentially no effect associated with that because as we go from summer into the fall months, because you load the cryo and then you go and you ensure that the tank is full before you go. In terms of the solid propulsion system, the lower the bulk temperature of the propellant, the lower the performance you get, and we know what the performance characteristics of these particular boosters are, and they've been tested throughout the full range. The summer months, you get the most performance out of the solids, and the performance will be slightly lower in the fall. But when we looked at our performance numbers, they were eye-watering in terms of margin to our insertion altitude that we were planning. So we're not particularly concerned with performance of the rocket at this point.
In the back here, behind Joey.
Thank you. Manuel Masanti from Debate. Given these two cancellations and further delays, I would like to know how these affect the other payload on board, like the 10 CubeSats that we have. Is there any reason that we need battery changes, or how these affect the CubeSats? Thank you.
Yeah, I think we answered the CubeSat question earlier. We know that we have limited battery life on the CubeSats, and we understand what the decay rate is. The customers of the CubeSats have been made aware of what our access is before the CubeSats were ever loaded. We also have payloads inside the Orion capsule, things like radiation monitors and a number of other things. And we know what the installed or baseline configuration was. Obviously, the longer you sit out there on the pad, the more radiation some of these sensors will accrue. But we also have witness sensors in there to help us understand what we accumulated during the space flight portion as opposed to here on the ground. So, there are a whole host of things that we plan ahead and track. And at this point, that we're really focused on getting the vehicle ready. And we understand what the potential impacts are to the payloads and the CubeSats, whether they're in Orion or on the Space Launch System rocket as part of the 10 CubeSats. So, I think we've talked that. So,
Here in the second row.
Hi, Denise Vickers from WUFT at the University of Florida. My question is for the senator. We understand that you're not going until you're ready and that it's right. And we know that scrubs are a very natural part of all of the space missions. That said, I gotta believe that there's some level of disappointment. Can you describe the demeanor inside the LCC, and specifically how's Charlie Blackwell Thompson, and what did you say to her today, after the decision to scrub?
The demeanor in the LCC is very professional. They do their job. Naturally, all of us, no more than all of us, including the LCC, wanted it to go today. But we also, and these guys that are the professionals know, it doesn't go until it's ready.
Any words? Anything? Did you share any private moments with Charlie? How's she holding up? Anybody? Any comments to keep her and her team motivated? I mean, everybody's motivated, but any other comments that you can share?
I will say this before Mike answers that. This team is very aware of potential fatigue, and therefore they gave sufficient time off for the team. Yesterday, after the MMT, which occurred, I think, 2 days ago, L-2, they gave everybody the day off so they could regroup and rest. And that's part of the lessons that came out of the Challenger report. Fatigue was a factor there. Mike?
Yeah, in terms of the firing room and Charlie in particular, one of the things that's one of the things that I particularly enjoy about the agency is you surround yourself with amazingly capable people and some amazing leadership, and Charlie is certainly one of those amazing leaders that we have in the agency. When I was talking to her about the scrub decision, she was focused, head in the game. She was, focused on the operation and the flight hardware and safing the vehicle and ensuring that her team had what they needed to get through the remaining operation. And that's kind of natural when you come from the operations realm. There's definitely time to reflect on that after you come out of the firing room, on the drive home, or once you're home. But that was neither the time nor the place, and she didn't show any inkling that she was focused on anything other than the right decisions for her team and for the spacecraft and for the rocket.
Thank you.
Marcia Smith, the Space Policy Online.
Marcia Smith, spacepolicyonline.com. Jim and Mike, I know you've both discussed this already a couple times, but I'm still unclear about the decision as to whether or not you're going to roll back. Jim, I heard you say you must roll back because of the FTS batteries. Mike, I heard you say if you roll back, then you might be able to recharge the CubeSats. You talked about how you might have you think you have several weeks of work. So if you were to go to the range and ask them to give you another waiver for the STS, it's not just a couple days, it's several weeks. So can you just sort of condense it all and concisely say, are you rolling back or not? Or when will you make a decision? And is the FTS battery the only thing that stands in your way of rolling back or not?
We don't have an FTS waiver right now beyond 25 days. So until we have that, we have to roll back in order to satisfy the range requirement. I said we'll work with the range to try and get that, but we have to decide what it is, what the duration we want based on the launch period availability we have, and what they're willing to give us. So that negotiation hasn't happened, so as far as I'm concerned, we have to roll back because we have to satisfy that requirement. That's where I think Mike's if statement comes from, because that is a possibility, but we don't have that today.
And I'll just be upfront with you. I don't always pick the best words, right? And I could have chosen a better phrase or a better word in that case. And Jim is absolutely right. It is not our decision. It is the range's decision. They're the ones responsible for managing public safety. So when we roll back, unless we get a waiver, it is a rollback scenario. So I said if, and I apologize for that. I probably could have chosen better words. If that's the hardest thing I had to deal with today, then I'm happy about that. So
Here in the back.
Good afternoon, Liz Hurley, WAFF Huntsville. My question can be for any or all of you all. Can you talk to me about actual costs of 2 back-to-back scrubs? And do you feel there's a cost to public perception? There was so much buildup to this launch. So many people came to Florida to spend a week hoping they'd get to see a moon rocket fly. Is there something that you're looking at now regarding the public?
you all talk about the back-to-back cost, and I'll talk about the perception. You know, space is the place. Everybody is really interested in this mission and going back to Mars and getting ready to go, going back to the moon and getting ready to go to Mars. One of the things that we did early on was we tried to stress that this is a test, and a test has certain risk. And we pounded that in every public comment that we had in order to get expectations in alignment with reality. And yet human nature is what you know it is. People are ready. You saw the crowds out here on Monday morning. A lot less crowds today. However, the nature of humans is that we want to see it and participate in it. And yet, despite all that, that's why these guys are such consummate professionals. They do it by the book and when it's ready.
And as far as cost, I mean, I can't give you a number. I can tell you the cost. There's commodities we use with oxygen and hydrogen. We do try and recover some of those as we drain back into our supply tanks, but a lot of those cryogens boil off, so we have to have them topped off. I forget how many tankers we had after Monday's attempt exactly. I think we had like 5 or 6 waves, as remember Charlie talking about. But the exact cost of that oxygen, hydrogen, I can't tell you off the top of my head. Yeah, no, I can't tell you that off the top of my head. You know, I go to commodities first, and obviously, you know, we schedule up resources to provide the common tracking for us, and then the labor of the folks here. But that labor folks are working on anyway. But so it's probably some of the assets that aren't ours that are outside of NASA's control, and the liquid oxygen and hydrogen. But I'm sorry, I can't tell you a number off the top of my head.
The cost of 2 scrubs is a lot less than a failure.
Michael Grushko with Nat Geo.
Answered both.
Hi, this is for the administrator. We are coming up on the 60th anniversary of President Kennedy's famous Rice University speech, in which he declared that we choose to go to the moon. Nearly 60 years later, how do you reflect on the upcoming anniversary and the challenges that we face as we choose once again to go to the moon? Thanks.
As a matter of fact, on the 60th anniversary, I will be in Rice Stadium. There will be 4,000 public school students that will be in the stadium, just as it was 60 years ago with public school students. And what President Kennedy said was, we choose to go to the moon and do other things, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. This is a whole new vehicle, a whole new technology, a whole new purpose of going back to the moon in preparation to go to Mars. And yes, it's hard.
On the phones, we have Ken Chang from the New York Times.
Hi, thank you. You've all talked about that you're not going to launch until you're ready. I was just wondering, have you felt any pressure from anywhere within NASA, from the White House, from anyone in Congress?
Ken's question was, have you felt pressure from anyone at NASA, the White House, or in Congress?
Well, I can tell you from my standpoint, no. And if I knew about it, I would try to stop it. But we have felt no pressure whatsoever.
I would agree with that, Ken. We're not feeling external pressure on any of this. This is something that is, as Administrator Nelson said, we're really focused on getting off safely because of the consequences of failure. So we're not feeling any pressure externally.
So we're running up on the end of our hour, so we have time for one more question. Ken Kramer?
Hi, thank you. Ken Kramer for Space Up Close. Let me ask Mike Serafine a question. You talked a few questions back about the possibility to do cryoloading to test that seal. I'm wondering how much cryos would you have to load to test the seal if it's seated, and what would be then the turnaround for a launch?
So, in terms of how much cryo we would have to load, what we would really only need to do is get through the chill down, slow fill, and into the fast fill. And typically when you get in the fast fill, if there's going to be a leak, that's where you're going to see it. Because you have the highest flow rate and the highest pressure, you don't need to fill the whole tank to do that. So, it would be somewhere, 5+%. It's not a significant amount of the liquid hydrogen tank. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question? I've been up since midnight. What's that?
How long could you turn around for a launch then? Would it be like 2 or 3 days later?
Again, it depends on a whole host of things. But, in terms of replenishing the commodities and setting up for a subsequent attempt, we know that we can turn around in either 48 or 72 hours, simply based on commodity and replenishment. If there were additional engineering investigations or additional work that we needed to do following a cryo test at that interface, it is something that would have to be factored in the plan. We're gonna understand this better next week, but in terms of the first part of that question, it's not a significant amount of the cryo compared to the full load of the tank.
Thanks, Mike. As we said earlier, we'll have an update for you next week on the path forward. And as always, tune into NASA TV and our social media channels to keep up to date on the latest. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great Labor Day.